On the day my husband died, I didn't say a word about the $21 million inheritance or the oak box buried under the piano, because by the time anyone realized either existed, I'd already placed 3 phone calls that would change the end of our family story forever. My name is Oksana, I'm 72, and I learned 2 things late in life. First, grief does not make people kinder, it just makes them louder. Second, revenge is patient enough to sit through a funeral without blinking. I won't give you a neat fairy tale. I'll give you the truth the way it arrived to me, in tilting frames, overheard whispers, receipts with corners torn off, and a melody someone played wrong on purpose. If you've ever felt invisible in your own house, you already understand why I kept silent when silence was the sharpest tool I owned. You can listen or you can judge. Either way, you'll know by the middle of this story why I answered the door to the detectives with a tray of tea and an envelope of numbers that would end careers. The morning my husband, Anton, slipped away, the house sounded like a hospital pretending to be a home. Machines spoke in measured beeps, nurses moved like careful ghosts. Our granddaughter Dana slept on the sofa with her shoes still on, fingers curled around her phone as if she could text death into behaving. I sat in the chair by his bed and counted the ridges in his knuckles, 58 on the left hand, 59 on the right, the missing one carved out by a lathe when he was 19 and fearless. When his breath thinned, I leaned close. "I'll carry what you can't," I said, and his mouth softened at the edges. That was the last kindness the day allowed. By afternoon, the house had filled with voices practiced at gentleness. "I'm so sorry. He was a wonderful man. If there's anything you need." They placed sorrow like coasters under every glass. My daughter-in-law, Milana, arrived with bakery pastries and the exact lipstick she wore to every important conversation. My son, Petro, moved in a triangle from kitchen to hallway to pantry, opening and closing doors the way men do when they need a task to explain their hands. I poured tea, I answered questions, I said yes to casseroles. I did not mention the safe deposit key hidden under the felt lining of Anton's violin case. I did not mention the notarized letter in the hollow foot of the piano bench. I did not mention that the fortune everyone assumed had evaporated with his last breath was, in fact, intact, shielded, and waiting. Later, when the house thinned to relatives with long drives ahead, I caught my daughter-in-law in the hallway holding her phone low and flat, photographing paperwork on the console table. She didn't notice me at first. She was bent with concentration, making sure the edge of each page sat square in the frame. "Inventory," she said when she finally looked up, like she'd rehearsed the word all day. "For the thank you notes." "Of course," I said, and moved the papers she hadn't yet reached into the crook of my arm. There are moments a woman knows she will be tested. For me, it was the way Milana's eyes slid over me, pausing not on my face, but on my hands. I had not worn my wedding ring since Anton's fingers swelled in the hospital and begged me with their silence to keep it safe for both of us. The skin where my ring belonged looked pale against the rest. A vacancy. A flag. She clocked it and kept smiling. That night, when everyone left, I made 3 calls. One to a lawyer named Bodon who handled musicians' estates and didn't ask unnecessary questions. One to a retired police inspector who owed me a favor from an orchestra fundraiser 20 years ago. And one to a bank manager whose mother had stitched a quilt for my church bazaar when her electricity was about to be cut off. I'd bought the quilt for twice the price and given it back to the raffle, and the story had traveled more places than I ever would. People remember when you do something quiet. They also remember when you do nothing at all. I was done with doing nothing. Tomorrow, I told each of them. Early. No signatures leave this house unless they belong to me. Grief taught me to hear the house breathe. In the days leading up to the funeral, I heard its sighs in the piano bench where Anton had hidden the letter I wasn't ready to read. I heard it in the scrape of chair legs when Petro avoided sitting near me, and in the scrape of Milana's heels when she followed the funeral director to the kitchen to discuss arrangements, by which she meant money. I heard it in the soft thud of Dana's footsteps at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, and in the hard thud of my own heart when I realized what had to be done. Detective stories like to pretend clues arrive in tidy sequences. Real life prefers to drop them like pennies from a hole in your pocket. You notice only when the weight changes. The first penny landed 4 months before Anton died, when I found a bill for a storage unit under a company name I didn't recognize, Thalia Holdings, paid with a wire transfer from an account I thought we had closed when we sold the summer house. The second penny landed when our old friend, a violinist named Yuri, stopped by with soup and left with his eyes too bright, like he had seen something he wanted and couldn't ask for. The third penny was a confession Anton made in the language we used at midnight when neither of us wanted to say the hard part out loud. "I wrote a second will," he whispered, his voice more breath than shape. I had to. To understand what it meant, you need to know the first thing about Anton. He belonged to sounds. He measured days by the hum of practice rooms and years by which orchestra directors slammed doors the loudest. Music was not a job, it was a geography. And like any geography, it had borders and smugglers and wars. He loved generously, but he trusted carefully. Somewhere along the line he learned to trust me most by telling me least. That, I think, was his one unsolved chord. He believed silence could protect the people he loved. I have always believed the opposite. So when the funeral ended and the house filled with relatives stacking dishes and telling the virtuous version of their lives, I went to the piano and lifted the bench lid the way a person opens a long story at the middle. Music scores, pencils, a metronome with a cracked glass face, and the letter, folded to the size of a postage stamp and tied with thread from my sewing kit. I did not open it yet. I sat, placed my hands on the keys, and played 3 notes, D, A, C. Decisions after consequences. It's a silly mnemonic, but the mind rebuilds the world with silly little ladders. I stood, fetched the oak box from its hiding place under the piano, and carried it to the kitchen table. The box had belonged to my mother. She used it for recipes. I had emptied it ages ago to store things no one else should see. When I lifted the lid, I saw exactly what I had expected: the safe deposit key, a photograph of a house that wasn't ours, and a plotting of names and numbers in Anton's exacting hand, crossed through and rewritten like a composer revising a difficult score. Thalia Holdings. A list of bank accounts that weren't in his name. For initials P, M, V, D, Petro. Milana. Veronica. Dana. Underneath, a second list in my hand, written 2 nights earlier when I realized who had been borrowing power from the outlet behind the pantry to charge a phone that wasn't ours. Names of people Milana had called the day after Anton entered hospice. A private wealth advisor. 2 realtors. And estate sale company. A number labeled simply notary. I made tea. I set the oak box open next to the stove where the steam softened the paper just a little. In the top drawer I found the notebook I'd used to track medication doses and turned to a clean page. There are crimes that begin with a shout. Ours began with a grocery list and the sound of the kettle whistle. If love is a script, then money is the stage manager who keeps whispering we're over time. People pretend that death pauses the performance. It doesn't. It just puts the lights up in places you hoped would stay dim. The will reading took place on a windy Thursday in a conference room designed to teach humility to anyone wearing the wrong shoes. Milana arrived in a coat that looked like it had its own apartment. Petro wore the tie he only brought out for weddings and tax audits. My granddaughter Dana, a graduate student with a heart that bruises and heals in the same hour, sat beside me with her hand on my elbow. On the opposite side of the table, Bodon, my lawyer, placed a folder at the center like a placemat everyone could stare at but not touch. "Thank you all for coming," he said, the same way he would have addressed a board or a choir. "I'm aware this is difficult." Milana smiled with her lips and not her eyes. "We all want what's best." Bodon nodded. So did Anton. He opened the folder and removed 2 envelopes, one sealed, one empty. "I'll begin by stating that the document I have here is the only legally recorded will on file. Before I read it, I'll ask for confirmation that no one has removed or altered any documents from the decedent's home or electronic devices." It was such a simple sentence that the room didn't breathe for a moment. Petro cleared his throat. "What does that mean?" "It means," Bodon said, "that if any draft will, codicil, or related document has been concealed or destroyed, the law takes a dim view." "I've done nothing of the sort," Milana said, which is always a remarkable thing to choose to say unprompted. Bodon unfolded the will and read. To my wife, Oksana, I leave the marital home, all personal effects, and my residual estate. To my son, Petro, I leave my father's ring and the photograph he loves of us fishing on the Dnipro. To my granddaughter Dana, I leave the upright piano in the music room and a letter that she will receive separately. To my daughter-in-law Milana, I leave my gratitude for taking care of my son and grandchild, and the knowledge that she is capable of more than cleverness if she chooses. It was not cruel. But it was not what Milana had expected. She leaned forward. You mean to say there is no trust for the family? No arrangement for property? For investment accounts? Bodon's mouth twitched. I have not yet read the residuary clause. She sat back. And there is, Bodon continued, a residuary clause. The estate's remaining assets, liquid and illiquid, are placed in the Thalia Trust. Distribution conditions and beneficiaries are specified in a codicil that will be lodged with the court upon validation. What is Thalia? Petro asked, the syllables stiff in his mouth. Amuse, I said. Comedy. Milana shifted. That sounds imprecise. It will be precise enough, Bodon said, once it's read. He refolded the document, slid it back into the envelope, and placed a second sheet of paper on the table. Before we proceed, I'm obligated to inform you that the court has already issued a temporary injunction on asset transfers. Any attempt to move funds out of Anton's accounts or to liquidate property will be construed as interference. That includes safe deposit boxes and storage units leased under any related entity. Milana smiled. This is all very theatrical. Bodon's eyes were kind and unyielding. Then allow me to continue the performance. He read the codicil, and the room changed shape. The Thalia Trust existed. It contained the proceeds from the sale of Anton's catalog of recordings, the life insurance policy we had quietly paid into since our hair first turned gray, and investments Anton had made when frightened musicians fled markets, and he walked into them with a conductor's confidence. The trust totaled just over $21 million on paper. Its terms were plain and, in their way, merciful. 2 beneficiaries, our granddaughter Dana and the music school Anton had created in a decaying wing of the community center 15 years ago and named for the first child he ever taught to play. Distributions would be split evenly, with a small stipend reserved for me, so I will never have to sell cookies to fix a roof again. Petro swallowed hard and lowered his eyes. Milana did not blink. And the rest of us? The rest of us, I said, can learn to live with fairness. Milana smiled like a blade. And what if we contest? Then we will enjoy each other's company in court, Bodon said. But contesting requires standing. And there's a condition neither of you meets. What condition? Petro asked. Fidelity, Bodon said. To the law. To the truth. I should explain how a grandmother who still writes grocery lists on starched index cards managed to fit a detective into her grief. There's nothing glamorous about it. You pull one thread and find that someone knitted your life with deceit at the base. Then you choose whether to stop pulling or keep going until your hands hurt. The retired inspector, a woman named Helena with a voice like a church bell and an appetite for exactness, came to the house the day after the will reading. She wore a navy coat with a missing button and carried a notebook older than my granddaughter. You said you had something that might be a crime, she told me as she took her seat at my kitchen table. Or something that will become one. Both, I said. I set the oak box between us and lifted the lid. Helena didn't touch anything at first. She just looked, the way doctors I remember from childhood would stand at the foot of a bed and inhale the shape of a disease before they called it by name. Thalia Holdings, she said after a minute. This is your husband's handwriting, yes? Yes. And these initials? Family, I said. But the placement confused me. Why list them at all? Because he suspected, Helena said. And because he loved you enough to trust your memory if not your hope. I gave her the photograph. A cinderblock storage unit corridor as gray as regret. On the door, the number 117 stenciled in paint that hadn't fully dried before someone pressed a thumb to it. In the corner, a smudge that could have been nothing. In the corner of that corner, a date. He rented a unit under a company name. I think he was hiding things he wanted protected from greed. Or from shame. Helena glanced up. Which do you think he feared more? Other people's shame, I said. Not his own. She wrote something down I could not read upside down. And what would shame look like in your family? Accounts that don't belong to us. Jewelry we never owned. A letter I haven't opened yet. Open it, she said. I did. Anton's letter was 4 pages written in his left-leaning script on the paper he bought in bulk when he discovered the expensive kind bled ink through to the next page. He explained things I half knew and admitted things I didn't. He had discovered, 3 years earlier, withdrawals from an account I had never used, small enough at first to look like fees, then larger, then disguised again. He hired an auditor who discovered that the account was one of several that routed through a holding company set up by a man Anton had once trusted to negotiate royalties. It wasn't a theft that would make headlines, it was the smaller, more intimate sort, a trickle that adds up to a river when no one checks the banks. The auditor had balked when Anton suggested pressing charges. You won't like what you find, the man said, and slid a photograph across the cafe table where they had met. In the photo, Milana sat with the wealth advisor I recognized from her call log. Between them, a printed statement bearing our family name stylized as a brand new logo we had never used. Anton had confronted Petro gently, the way he always said a father should. Petro had cried and promised he knew nothing. I believed him in the same way you believe the weather when it tells you the rain will stop by morning. It might. But you should still bring an umbrella. Anton set up the trust. He named the community music school. He made me the executor with exactly 2 guardians beside me, Bodon, and the retired inspector now stirring honey into her tea. He did not tell me because he thought knowledge would anchor me and he wanted me free to grieve. He miscalculated, but not in a way that made me love him less. He suspected his daughter-in-law, Helena said, scanning the last page, and wanted to protect your granddaughter. Yes. And you? He wanted me to choose when to use this, I said. And on whom? Helena nodded. Then we will choose well. You cannot legally avenge yourself on grief. But you can drag the people who tried to profit from it into the kind of light that peels away their pretenses like old varnish. The plan was simple enough that I worried it would fail. Helena called it a push test. We would push a rumor with a shape only a guilty person would follow. We would tell exactly 4 people that the safe deposit box held Anton's list of accounts abroad along with 8 bearer bonds, anachronistic, delicious bait in a world that thought itself too modern to fall for paper. We would give these 4 people a number to call for the notary. The number belonged to Helena's former junior officer, a woman with a memory like a steel trap lined with velvet. 2 of the 4 were family. The other 2 were outsiders who had somehow become insiders without my permission, the private wealth advisor and the manager of the estate sale company who had handed me a contract to sign while pretending to mourn in my living room. We fed the rumor through a crack, Milana's cousin, who had once borrowed a dress from me and returned it unwashed. We waited. The first person to call the notary was, to my private sorrow, my son. He asked if the safe deposit box required both signatures, mine and Anton's, or if the widow could access it alone. We are in cooperation, he said, careful as a tightrope walker eyeing the ground. The second caller was the wealth advisor, who wanted to know whether the bonds remained bearer instruments in the modern sense. The third caller used a burner phone to ask what time the bank manager would be at her desk on Friday. And the fourth caller was Milana. I'm concerned, she told the notary, a tremor in her voice that could have been grief or calculation. My mother-in-law is not well. Perhaps I should collect the documents until we can find someone neutral. The notary asked her to repeat her name. Milana did. The notary asked whether she had power of attorney. Milana said yes. That is when the conversation ended and the court papers began to grow like yeast in a warm bowl. If you have never watched a court recognize a lie at the speed of paperwork, I recommend it once in life purely as a corrective to cynicism. The bank manager produced the access logs for the safe deposit room. One visitor, last month, Milana herself, using a document she printed and notarized at a shipping store with a stamp that did not exist on any registries. The storage unit log showed a late-night entry from a car registered to the estate sale manager, who, when questioned, said he was just helping out a friend by moving boxes that looked like sheet music. The wealth advisor switched to a lawyer so quickly his assistant forgot to change her voicemail script. Petro came to the house with eyes like a repentant teenager and asked to talk. We sat at the kitchen table at the same spots where we used to balance his homework between plates of food when he was 12 and more bone than certainty. He didn't look angry. He looked afraid. I wanted to touch his hand and I wanted to ask who had touched his conscience last. I didn't either. Ma, he said, it isn't what you think. That phrase, I said gently, never means what you think it means. He took a breath that tried to be steady and failed. I knew she was planning something. I didn't know the scale. She said the school could wait. She said scholarships were nice, but family came first. You know how she is when she decides a thing. She is not the weather, I said. She does not make it rain. He rubbed his face. I told her not to go near the box. I told her you would know. She said you were too sentimental to handle all that paperwork and that someone needed to take charge. And you? I asked. He lowered his head, so I had to look at the thinning hair at his crown. I let her believe things about you that were easier for me than the truth. And the truth is? That you are stronger than both of us and we didn't want to pay the tax on being your children. I did not forgive him. Not then. Not about the box. Not about the nights he let Milana talk over me as if I were the radio in a room where no one could find the off switch. Forgiveness is not a theater we need to perform in front of witnesses. Forgiveness is a key you choose to carry or set down. Petro, I said, I can help you if you tell the truth to the people who count. That includes a judge. It also includes the girl who still thinks the world is mostly fair because you taught her to think so. I can't lose Dana, he said. Then don't, I said. Lose Milana instead. Revenge is a word people associate with fire. I wanted precision. Fire burns the guilty and the curtains both. Precision removes only the rot. The day the detectives arrived with a search warrant, I was making vareniki the way my mother taught me, with sour cherries so tart you respected them. I had set out plates for the officers as if they were cousins who happened to work odd hours. They were polite, almost tender, when they stepped over the threshold. I showed them the piano bench and the empty space where the oak box had sat before I carried it into the kitchen, not because I feared the law, but because I feared having to watch my life examined with gloved hands. They asked to see the storage receipt. I handed them the photograph with the smudged date. Helena, in a sweater that looked like it had seen better committees, stood to one side with her notebook and did not speak except to answer questions directly addressed to her. This, too, is a form of mercy. They found what we expected. In the storage unit, sheet music boxes with false bottoms, inside of which sat envelopes of statements, a bag of old coins Anton had learned to collect when the orchestra toured a country with a currency he distrusted, and a velvet case containing a necklace I had thought lost years ago and had convinced myself not to miss. The necklace had belonged to Anton's grandmother. The invoice for its appraisal listed a buyer's name I recognized from Milana's text messages, a name with 3 different phones, and an address that ended in a street I only ever saw in glossy magazines. They also found something I had not expected, a ledger in Anton's hand with page numbers that skipped like a record with dust in its groove. I flipped through the pages after they photographed it, and my throat closed when I recognized the missing ones. They belonged to the month our roof leaked and the community school's furnace failed, and we received an anonymous donation with exactly the amount needed for both. There, in his careful script, Anton had written, "Make her believe in miracles at least once a year." Helena placed her hand on the back of my chair without touching me, a nearness that allowed me to keep breathing until the room came back into focus. Why do men call something a secret when it is just their love refusing to count? She said later, when the officers left. Why do women call something a duty when it is just our love refusing to sleep? I said. We laughed, not because anything was funny, but because laughter is how we testified that we were still human. The court hearings were less interesting than the hallway conversations between them. Inside the courtroom, lawyers spoke like they were giving performance reviews to the universe. Outside, people told the truth by accident. The estate sale manager claimed he had never entered the storage unit alone. The security footage disagreed. The wealth advisor insisted he had never advised a client to transfer assets without consent. His email suggested otherwise, complete with smiley faces and too many exclamation points. Milana's lawyer argued that my age and grief made me unreliable. My notes and taped calls made that argument look like a pair of shoes 3 sizes too small, instantly ridiculous and obviously painful. Petro took the stand only once. He apologized to the court for allowing himself to be used, which is like apologizing to the ocean for drowning. But when the judge asked who had urged him to do the right thing, he turned and looked at me. "She did," he said. "And she told me to do it even if it cost her something too." That's how I knew she was telling the truth. Dana's testimony made the court clerk cry. She told them about the school and how her grandfather kept a box of broken metronomes above the kitchen cabinets because he liked the sound they made when the second hand gave up. She told them about how I sat with Anton when his memories began to tangle and how I would hand him a spoon and say "conduct" to keep his hands moving. She told them about the day Milana asked her to sign a form she didn't understand and how she had said no because Grandma says the word no is a fence you build around what matters most. After that, the momentum shifted. Not all at once, but like a curtain that finally accepts the light and lets the stage be what it is. The judge froze the accounts. He ordered the return of the necklace. He referred the falsified notary stamp to the district attorney. He did not jail anyone. This is not that kind of story, and punishment is not as simple as people hope when they are angry. But he did something better. He wrote into public record a description of exactly what had been attempted, and he declared the trust valid, the distributions on schedule, and my authority as executor intact. When we left the courthouse that day, Helena walked on my slow side. "You did not gloat," she said. "I was too busy counting my breaths," I said. "Good," she said. "Gloating rots your tongue. Revenge looks like victory if you squint at it, but squinting is bad for the eyes." What I wanted was restoration. To take what had been bent by greed and straighten it so that music could pass through again. We held the scholarship ceremony in the same community center where the furnace once failed. The paint still peeled in the far corner, and the office still smelled faintly of damp paper, but the stage glowed. I stood to the side while Dana read the names of the first students to receive awards from the Thalia Trust. Some were children of the city's newest arrivals, the sort of children who learn to fold themselves small so their parents can breathe. Some were sons and daughters of the old guard who had watched the city change and thought music might help them find their place in it. All of them wore the faces of people who had been told no and refused, politely, diligently, to accept it as the last word. I spoke last, not because I wanted the final word, but because I wanted to see the faces I was speaking to before I shaped the words at all. My husband believed in difficult music, I told them. The kind that doesn't give up its melody easily, but rewards you when you lean closer. He believed families are like orchestras, full of people capable of astonishing harmony and ridiculous mistakes. He believed the difference between noise and music is intention. "We intend for you to have the tools you need to make whatever music you come here to make." They clapped. Dana cried. Petro stood at the back and didn't move, which in our family is the new language for repentance. After the ceremony, a woman in a cardigan the color of clean sky approached me. "My son is one of your students," she said. "He thought no one would ever put his name on a program." "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I said. "Thank my husband's stubbornness and the law's patience, in that order." She laughed and squeezed my hand. "I will," she said, and I believed her. That evening, Dana and I walked home along the river. The wind had teeth and the water wore its winter color, a bruised green that made the sky look warmer than it was. "Grandma," she said, "do you think we did the right thing?" "We did a necessary thing," I said. "Rightness is often a consequence, not a goal." "Will I always feel guilty for loving you more than I love my father sometimes?" she asked. "You will feel honest," I said. "Guilt is just honesty wearing a coat too heavy." She nodded, the way her grandfather used to when he agreed and didn't want to say it aloud. We walked in silence until the streetlights carved us into light and shadow and light again. You think that should be the end. It wasn't. Revenge is not a door you close once and forget. It's a habit you must dismantle so it doesn't convince you to redecorate your soul in its colors. Milana did not go quietly. She told anyone who would listen that I had corrupted the process, that I had manipulated a grieving court with my age, that I had stolen money from her children. She had never been good with pronouns. She tried once more, through a cousin with a creative approach to accounting, to claim that Anton had promised her a stipend for family management. The cousin arrived at my door with a briefcase and a look he must have practiced in mirrors. I let him in because hospitality is not weakness. It is a way to keep your enemies from tracking mud across your conscience. He laid out documents he had typed too quickly and highlighted too strategically. "It's very simple," he said, "which is how you know it is very not." "Would you like tea?" I asked. "I prefer coffee." "Then you should have brought some," I said. "We drink tea here." He didn't smile, which made me like him more. He cleared his throat. "As you can see, the agreement is mutually beneficial. You avoid a publicity mess. Milana receives recognition for her years of effort." "What years would those be?" I asked. "The years she told my granddaughter to stop practicing because the sound gave her a headache? The years she photographed my paperwork instead of asking for the thing she wanted? The years she taught my son to be small?" He swallowed. "The years she handled the family's social obligations." I said. "You mean parties?" He stared at his hands. I let the silence fill the room until it lifted the corners of his shoulders and set them down again. "You may tell Milana," I said, "that if she wishes to contribute to the music school, we will accept donations starting at $5. If she wishes to apologize to her daughter, she may ask Dana for an appointment and keep it. If she wishes to threaten me, she should know I am tired but not fragile." He gathered his papers and stood. "You'll regret this," he said. "People always say this when they have already run out of better lines." "I regret trusting her with my son's heart," I said. "The rest is just cleanup." He left. I made more tea. Fate is a word people use when they want their choices to sound like weather. I used to believe it more than I do now. If fate existed the way the poets promised, I would have met a kinder version of myself at 30 and saved us both a lot of years. Instead, I met my real self at 72, when the world assumed I had already said what I came to say. Do not mistake me. I am not heroic. I am practical. I have simply lived long enough to see what happens when you leave the work of justice to the people who shout the loudest. They tire. They trade favors. They forget. Grandmothers do not forget. We are archivists of what the world would rather misplace. The last box I opened in the storage unit was a shoebox wrapped in brown paper and string, addressed to no one and everyone. Inside were photographs of students who had passed through the music school in its early, fragile years. On the back of each, Anton had written a note, where they played now, who they taught, whether they still sent postcards. At the bottom of the stack lay a single picture of us at 22, standing on a sidewalk the year we arrived in a city that smelled like tire rubber and possibility. On the back, he had written in his cramped script, "If I go first, make sure the music goes further than we managed. And forgive me for hiding anything I hid poorly." I set the photograph on my lap and laughed. "You were brilliant at hiding," I said aloud to no one, "and you were terrible at it." Both are true. When I came home, I put the photograph on the mantel. I didn't tell anyone. Some things live louder when they are not turned into speeches. Petro began to come by on Sundays, not to ask for anything, just to sit. Sometimes he brought a bag of apples like a peace offering. Sometimes he fixed the crooked cupboard. Sometimes we said nothing at all. He began going to counseling on Tuesdays. He began, in a way I could trust, to choose. Dana moved her piano into the front room where the morning light does something generous to the dust. She played scales while studying case law and wrote papers that made professors hold their breath before grading them. She taught on Saturdays at the music school. Sometimes, when she thought I wasn't listening, she would improvise around 3 notes, D, A, C, and smile when she drifted into a phrase that felt exactly like my mother's kitchen on a day when the bread rose properly. Milana moved to a place with better lighting for photographs. She liked the kind of light that forgives before you ask. I learned to sleep again. If you have come all this way waiting for the part where I say revenge wasn't worth it, I will disappoint you. It was worth it. But not because I damaged anyone. Because I refused to let the ugliest version of love dictate what love was allowed to afford. People asked me, in the careful voice used for elderly women and wild animals, whether I was relieved. Relief is for danger that passes you on the highway. This was different. This was the feeling of a room you thought was small revealing its second door. I wake now before the sun and sit with my tea. I write lists that begin with verbs: protect, choose, teach, laugh, rest. I keep the safe deposit key in the violin case where it belongs, not because it is still needed, but because I like the sound it makes when the metal touches wood. Sometimes I think about the worst day, the day death sat in our house and asked to be embraced like a polite guest. I think about how often we tell the living to behave as if they are already ghosts. I think about how often we ask women to show mercy we would never demand of men. And then I think about the day the students accepted their scholarships and the way one boy, a child with hair like a summer storm, looked at his certificate as if the paper weighed exactly as much as his future. I think about how he folded it carefully and put it in his backpack and then patted the pocket as if to reassure both of them that they belong to each other now. I do not believe in destiny anymore. I believe in distribution. Music, money, mercy. The last time I visited the storage unit, I brought a broom and a small radio. I swept while the news whispered about other people's tragedies in a tone that made all of us sound like extras in a scene we never auditioned for. I turned off the radio and hummed a tune Anton used to hate because it lodged in your head like a pebble in a shoe. When I finished sweeping, I closed the door and pressed my palm against the metal. "We're done," I said. "Thank you for your service." On my way out of the building, I saw a young woman carrying 2 boxes taller than her torso. She struggled with the door, and I held it open. "You moving in or moving out?" I asked. "Depends," she said, breathless, "on whether I can fit the rest of my past into the back of my car." "You can," I said. "But you don't have to." She laughed in the way people laugh when the stranger in front of them has accidentally said exactly the right thing. "Thanks," she said. "My grandmother would like you." "Mine would like you too," I said, and meant it. I drove home slowly, letting the traffic tell me what it wanted, stopping at lights I could have raced, counting my breaths. At a red light, an orchestra tune came on the radio, something by a composer who loved brass and complicated grief. I did not cry. I did not grip the wheel. I listened the way you listen when you have survived a winter and have decided to trust the calendar again. When the light changed, I moved forward. The city smelled like rain on hot pavement, my favorite alchemy. Somewhere, a child practiced a scale. Somewhere, a woman told herself she had no choices while a key sat under the felt of her piano bench waiting for her hand. If you need someone to tell you that the story you are living through will make sense when you reach its middle part, here I am. If you need someone to prove that silence can be used for building instead of erasing, here I am. If you need a grandmother to teach you how to play 3 notes in the right order and build a life around them, sit down at my table. I will make tea. And if you are the one who thought a widow would be too tired to read a ledger, too soft to call a detective, too old to understand a trust agreement, well, I hope you like the taste of being wrong. It does not pair well with cherries, but it is nourishing all the same. On the day my husband died, I didn't say a word about the $21 million inheritance or the oak box under the piano. I waited. I watched. I built a stage where the truth could be heard without anyone having to shout. Then I played 3 notes, and the rest followed.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.